Hello everyone. I wanted to do a recording to talk about the game anti-cheats. My goal here is to try and educate you as best as I can so you can see why anti-cheats just don't work the way that we expect them to. For starters, there are many different anti-cheats. As you can see, there's a few up on my screen. Warzone has its own custom anti-cheat. Valorant uses the vanguard system. There's easy anti-cheat, which is pretty common with Smite. I think Fortnite's another one that uses it. And then, of course, there's BattleEye, which is PUBG, and a couple others. So the reason I'm listing all these is to show you that this presents a problem. We don't know if they are doing this, but unless these anti-cheats are communicating with each other, it's impossible to ban a person who is a habitual cheater. The reason for that is because they use different systems, so unless, one's saying, hey, we got this cheater coming to your game, heads up type of thing, unless that happens, they're not going to be able to deal with it. And even then, they might not take action, from another anti-cheat. It's kind of like the whole law enforcement reporting system, right? They're not going to take a report from an out-of-state unit, right? So it's also going to be that issue more than likely where they just simply can't take the report because it wasn't reported on their system and they don't have the evidence from their system to corroborate whatever report the other anti-cheat is giving them. So you do have that issue going on. If people were using the same anti-cheats, or I should say companies, if the companies were using the same anti-cheats, it might make communications and evidence sharing a bit easier is what I'm getting at. That's only one problem, though. Now let's get into the more technical, deep stuff. The issue with anti-cheats is that they're very limited in what they can do because of all the licenses and laws related to software. You see, Vanguard is a unique exception to this, which is Valorant's anti-cheat. Vanguard is probably the most controversial anti-cheat because of the fact that it's very deep in your operating system, which is Windows in most people's cases. It's very deep in Windows to a point where it's just an ethical concern. That's how deep in the operating system it is. However, Valorant's Vanguard anti-cheat does a very good job because of how deep it is. Let's explain why. For most cheaters out there, they buy their cheats from somebody that created them because they don't have the skill level of a person who can get into the game files, create that cheat, and then run it as a program, right? So most of your cheaters are gonna buy their cheats rather than make it themselves because they just don't have the skill level to do it. So the Vanguard anti-cheat defeats these people because it's so deep in the operating system, which is Windows, that it reduces the skill. Well, I guess you can say it just makes it harder to fight. You need a higher skill cap, essentially, is what it is. You need a higher skill cap to defeat Vanguard because of how deep in the operating system it is. That's why Vanguard works so well. So despite all the controversy, it is actually a very good anti-cheat just because of the fact that it changes the skill level needed to cheat, is the short version. So let's talk about the operating systems themselves because this plays another portion of this. Like I said, Vanguard's anti-cheat is an exception to the rule because it went through a lot of hoops to be created. And that reason lies in the licensing and other things. You see, you can create any number of software, but then you have to fight two things. One, the laws related to privacy, and they vary from country to country. And two, you have to fight the license of the operating system. Windows is a proprietary license, which means that you would need permission from Microsoft to make certain modifications. You can't just make modifications willy-nilly. You have to go through this whole legal process of talking to Microsoft, filing the paperwork, and possibly paying them for that modification. You see, with it being proprietary, that means Microsoft is well within their rights to demand money, for using their operating system in that function. Microsoft is a greedy company, so you can expect that to be a very good chance of happening. let's just say you can get around Microsoft. Well, and the laws. Well, now you've got a new problem. And that is the player base. Because obviously, as Vanguard has proven, people will get their pitchforks and go to Twitter if they don't like the way you're handling things. Which is reasonable to happen because, as the controversy has pointed out, the people who own Valorant and of course also Vanguard, are from companies that don't exactly have a great reputation for privacy in the world. I'll put it that way. I don't want to get into any, ethical discussions, or racial discussions or that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into that. So we'll just say that, that's your problem is also the player base, because they're not going to be happy with the anti-cheat if it's coming from or has involvement with a country where their reputation is not exactly the greatest. So yes, you do have that third issue going on. Let's talk about the licensing themselves as well, seeing as we just went over that a little bit. So licensing varies and on the operating system. Obviously, like I pointed out, Windows are proprietary, but Linux is the interesting one. There's a reason I bring it up so often in my channel. I want people to be aware of what Linux is capable of and to support it more. I'm going to educate as much as I can on Linux for that reason, and I'm now going to show you why. Okay. So Wikipedia isn't exactly a great place to reference, but I want to point this out because this is the one thing that's actually very correct with this. So Linux is known as a GNU General Public License. That means you are free to basically modify, run, and a bunch of other things. So that means you can do whatever you want to within reason on Linux without having to go through the whole legal process that I was mentioning with Microsoft. Well, at least to a certain degree. I mean, basically you skip the whole I need to go to Microsoft phase, but you would still need about all the privacy laws that exist in the world. And of course, they vary by country to country. But the fact of the matter is, you can do it. And probably a lot easier on Linux than you can Windows. So why am I bringing this up? Well, this comes back to two things that I was just talking about. The whole players want to ensure their privacy, the laws involved, and all that. Because here's the thing. I think that an ethical anti-cheat that will work really well has to be done on Linux. Because it needs to be deep in the operating system, just like Valorant's Vanguard system is, in order to change the skill required to cheat. Another thing, too, that I think could be done is perhaps maybe modification to the game files themselves. If a game is native to Linux and you can install it as is, just like you would on Windows, then I would assume you can protect the game files with something like AES encryption or something. If you can protect the game files with AES encryption or something, then I think that would also reduce how many people can cheat. Because then again, that presents a new skill factor involved, right? So now you need somebody who can not only get past the AES encryption, assuming this even happens, but you also need somebody capable of getting to the game files, understanding the code, and creating a program to it. So you're essentially adding more defenses is what you're doing. And I think that's more than possible with Linux to do an AES encryption or an equivalent of that, on top of making it damn impossible to cheat because of how deep it is in the operating system. That would be the best way to handle it ethically. Let's be real. I think that the industry as a whole would accept that because Linux does have a reputation of being perhaps the most secure operating system in the world. If you don't believe me, just simply go read about Linux distributions. I'll point you to one called TEN, T-E-N, spelled normally. TEN was created by the United States Air Force and NASA as a joint project. So I want to point out that there are military versions of Linux, essentially, out in the world today. It's been done in the past, and it probably is still going on, it's just nobody mentions it. Oh, and another thing, too, I will point out that I think would be worth your time reading into is the history of Linux, because there are two distant relatives, if you will, to Linux, and they are Android and PlayStation. Yes, you heard me right. PlayStation actually does use Linux to a certain degree. How much of a degree, I don't know. But I am aware Linux is present in the PlayStation software or operating system. This is something I was made aware of because somebody jailbroke, I think it was a PlayStation 4, if my memory is correct. Yeah, they jailbroke that, and they found a command line equivalent deep in the PlayStation. And sure enough, it's the same command line Linux uses. Funny how the world works, right? So yeah, just conclusion to this, I want you to do some reading on your own and, ask more of the game developers, because we're going to be stuck with Windows and DirectX until people start asking for more Linux and Vulkan. That's just how it's going to be. But that's all I have for today. Thanks for listening.